Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant, where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watched in the WWE Network. With that being the month of August, I thought I'd take a look back at the SummerSlam pay-per-view, starting with the very first one. I didn't really have a series of which pay-per-views I'd be watching. I know I wanted to watch the 2002 SummerSlam, maybe one of the ones from '08 or 2011. I really enjoyed both of those. But I thought I'd take the opportunity to watch a SummerSlam I've never seen before, and I believe this was the first WWE pay-per-view from the 80s that I've seen in its entirety. So that was exciting, so I thought I'd take a look back at the first ever SummerSlam from 1988. So here we go, kicking off the show is a tag team match, pitting the Bulldogs against the fabulous Rougeau brothers. Very good tag team match. There wasn't anything on the line. I don't think I knew who the fabulous Rougeau brothers were. I know I've heard of them before, but I was never really familiar with their work. Bulldogs, obviously one of the best tag teams of all time. But a great tag team match to kick off the show, especially considering that it wasn't even over a tag team title. I'm not sure if there was a feud going into this matchup or whatnot, but I thought this was a great tag team matchup. It didn't even feel like 20 minutes. That's how long this matchup went. Ended on a draw. The matchup was about to end. The Bulldogs were about to pick up the victory, but the match ended before a winner could be decided due to going to a draw. And it's very funny that the match ended in a draw, and I don't know at what point they got rid of the draws in wrestling. I know TNA does them from time to time. They only bring them up when they need to. I know they did it for the Bound for Glory series a couple of years ago. But for the most part, WWE hasn't done a draw in a long time. And I'm not talking about no contests. I'm talking about time limits to a matchup. And it was one of those things that Jim Ross was talking about on his podcast not too long ago, that it's one of those things that is missing from wrestling nowadays, specifically the WWE, because it's one of those things that, I mean, if you really think about it, can you have a match go for hours on end and never end? I mean, I know we all know it's going to end within 5 minutes or so, but realistically, I mean, you think within the context of the storyline here, if there's no time limit, does that mean the match can go on for hours, days, weeks on end without ever ending? I mean, I'm not saying that's possible, but that's kind of the logistical things, the realistic aspect of the obstacles that you run into when you kind of take away stuff like that. So I thought it was great that this matchup ended up going to a draw. I don't know if a rematch is ever held or not. This was at a time when they only had pay-per-views every few months. I believe this was the first pay-per-view I had since WrestleMania 4 that year, and the next pay-per-view would have been at Survivor Series on Thanksgiving a couple of months later. But yeah, a great way to kick off the show. Great tag team match. Really enjoyed it. Next matchup up next was Bad News Brown taking up Ken Patera in singles competition. Decent matchup for what it was. Bad News Brown ended up going over. Ken Patera, the name sounded extremely familiar for some reason. I did some research up on him. It didn't ring any bells, but the name sounded really familiar for some reason. But Bad News Brown, I am familiar with. Ended up going over here. Really a nothing matchup. Bad News Brown dominated most of it. Ken Patera got some offense in, but that was pretty much it. Pretty much a nothing matchup. But it was decent for what it was. Really nothing out of the ordinary, I should say. Up next, we had Rick Rude taking on the Junkyard Dog. And what I thought was a very fun contest. Familiar with both these individuals, of course. Rick Rude was probably, I'm not going to say the MVP of this show, but he was one that I really enjoyed watching. The gimmick, the theme music, the look, the guy had everything. So I'm surprised this guy never ended up making it to the main event level. Or he did end up competing for the title a few times. But what I mean is that he never ended up winning the WWF Championship at any point within his run in WWE. But anyway, though, a very good contest for what it was, really. The action I don't really remember all that much, but the storytelling was that Rick Rude was feuding with Jake Roberts at the time, and he was going after his wife, and at one point in the contest towards the end, Rick Rude ended up jumping off the top rope and pulled down his tights, and had Cheryl Roberts, the wife of Jake Roberts, printed on his tights. And it was kind of a regular thing for Rick Rude to do at the time. I know he did it with the IC Championship at one point. He did it with, I think, Miss Elizabeth at one point. But either way, I thought it was a really cool thing for Rick Rude to do. He was a great heel, got great heat before the contest. Just bashing everyone in attendance, calling them fat slobs and stuff like that. Rick Rude is such a money heel that, like I said before, I'm so surprised they didn't do more with him. But before Junkyard Dog could bounce back and pick up the victory, and Junkyard Dog was also one of those guys that he might not have had all that much success in WWE in terms of titles won or accomplishments, but the guy was a big draw down in the South region area of the United States during the 70s and 80s. So the fact they didn't do more with him in WWE is surprising as well. But he was over with the gimmick that he had, and people loved him. So it was a good contest. Jake Roberts ended up interfering, causing a disqualification, handing that win to Rick Rude. Junkyard Dog. I'm actually glad that he showed concern for losing the matchup. It wasn't like, it's okay, you got your hands on Rick Rude, just let it slide. No, he looked legitimately pissed that he lost the contest. And they didn't go into a brawl or anything, but Jake Roberts getting the better of Rick Rude there, and the crowd went crazy when Jake Roberts came out to beat up Rick Rude, because those two, like I said before, were at a heated rivalry at the time, one of the best rivalries probably featured on this show. Why they didn't collide at SummerSlam is beyond me. I'm not exactly sure if they faced off at WrestleMania or if the feud started after this. As you can tell, I didn't do much research before watching this pay-per-view, but I don't know if they faced off at WrestleMania or whatever happened. But I'm surprised they didn't collide on the show, but it was probably for the better to keep the feud going, because it was a great way to further the feud without having them face off on the show at the very first SummerSlam. So for what this was, I thought it was really enjoyable. Like I said before, Jake Roberts as a babyface was extremely over, and that showed here. So great stuff there. Up next, we had the Powers of Pain taking on the Bolsheviks in tag team action. Once again, nothing really at stake, just kind of a standard tag team matchup lasting about 5 minutes. Good tag team matchup. Really goes to show how important tag team wrestling was at the time, and that would come later on with Survivor Series and all the tag team matches they would hold that show. But with 4 tag team matches on the show, it really goes to show how important tag team wrestling was at the time. With the opening contest, like I said before, which was great. This matchup, we had the tag team title matchup between Demolition and the Hart Foundation, and even the main event of the show was the tag team matchup, pitting the Mega Powers against the Mega Bucks, Ted DiBiase and Andre against Hogan and Savage. So tag team wrestling was at its finest at the time. I don't really know where it stooped off and stopped becoming important. And that tag team renaissance that we had late last year in 2013 was showing for the first time in almost 20, 30 years that tag team wrestling, showcasing the art of tag team wrestling. And it was great to see that on the show. Like I said, not the best tag team matchup here. There were some sloppy spots that I wasn't really a fan of, but it was what it was. It was a tag team matchup, pretty standard, pretty formulaic. Powers of Pain ended up going over, and that's basically what it was. Up next, another big angle going into the show was the Intercontinental Championship matchup, pitting the defending champion Honky Tonk Man against the challenger Brutus the Barber Beefcake. However, before the matchup, I think the week before on Superstars or Primetime Wrestling, whatever the show was, Brutus Beefcake was taken out with an injury, so he was written out of storylines with an injury angle, leaving this matchup an open challenge for Honky Tonk Man for SummerSlam. He participated in a backstage segment before this matchup, saying, "I call out anyone to challenge for my championship tonight." Mean Gene was going to tell him who it was, but Honky Tonk Man wanted to keep it a surprise. So he's waiting out in the ring. And remember, this is at a time the Honky Tonk Man was reigning as Intercontinental Champion for whatever it was, 400, 500 days, well over a year. I know that for a fact. I think it was around the 400-day ballpark. But that being said, though, out comes the Ultimate Warrior to a massive reaction from the live crowd. They go crazy to see him. The bell doesn't even ring yet when Ultimate Warrior runs into the ring, takes out Honky Tonk Man, takes out Jimmy Hart, who flees from the ring. Within a matter of 30 seconds or less, Honky Tonk Man hits a splash, gets the victory. Your new Intercontinental Champion. Place went crazy when he was announced the victor in the new Intercontinental Champion. In a monumental moment in history, Honky Tonk Man, whether he is or isn't the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time is definitely up for debate, especially given the fact most of his title defenses ended in disqualification. But with that being said, though, for as long as he held the championship, and that was never really made mention of on this show, I was surprised about that. The commentators, Billy Graham and Gorilla Monsoon, never really made mention of the fact that Honky Tonk Man had been holding the championship for as long as he was. So I was kind of surprised about that. But for what it was, though, I thought this angle was absolutely awesome. Something really never been done before in wrestling at this point in time. This kind of stuff you see all the time nowadays, but it really has never been executed to perfection like it was on this show, with a champion hated as much as Honky Tonk Man. For him to lose the championship in a matter of 30 seconds was huge. They'd go on to continue to feud for the IC Championship in the months after this, and just a awesome moment. Definitely one of the best SummerSlam moments of all time, in my opinion anyway, and a great title change. Great way to kick off the run as Intercontinental Champion for the Ultimate Warrior. And the guy was fucking over at the time. It's amazing how over he was in the 80s. And at one point, even beating out Hulk Hogan in terms of merchandise and reactions and stuff like that. It's crazy how over Ultimate Warrior was and how big of an impact and how big of an icon he was during this point in time in wrestling. But great angle there. Really enjoyed that. Short and sweet, to the point. Your new Intercontinental Champion, Ultimate Warrior. Up next, we had Dino Bravo against Don Muraco. Pretty standard contest. I think Bobby the Brain Heenan was in the corner of Dino Bravo, or supposed to be, or something along those lines. The matchup was what it was. Not one of the better matches on the show, but it was, a standard singles contest. Dino Bravo went over. They were probably high on him at the time. But it was a pretty standard singles match, really. Nothing much more to say about that. Dino Bravo, your victor there. Up next, Demolition taking on the Hart Foundation for the Tag Team Championships. Demolition had, in less than a year with the company, had taken the tag team titles from the Hart Foundation. Hart Foundation embarking on a face turn from that point forward. So a very good contest between these two tag teams. I think Hart Foundation were the baby faces here, and Demolition were the heels. Or if they might have been the baby faces too. I'm not exactly sure. But either way, very good contest. They had a nice feud going into the matchup. Like I said before earlier on in the video, tag team wrestling was at its finest at the time. So they did a great job of building up this feud and the importance of the tag team championships. Demolition, kind of seen as the ripoff of the Legion of Doom after the Legion of Doom, one of the most over acts in wrestling ever. Ended up departing the company. Vince McMahon wanted to recreate that success with Demolition, and they did to an extent. Demolition was a very popular tag team, still not yet in the WWE Hall of Fame. Whether they ever will be, I have no idea. I would think so. I think definitely one of the best tag teams in history. Definitely not as good as the Legion of Doom, but I would say they're up there. But even still, though, they retain here, still the WWE World Tag Team Champions. Hart Foundation, this face turn for them would kind of set the stage for Bret Hart as a singles competitor down the line, Intercontinental Champion, and eventually the WWF Champion. But even still, though, good tag team match there, enjoyed that. Up next, the Big Boss Man taking on Koko Ware. It was absolutely surreal to see Big Boss Man on the show, and to think that 11 years later, so well over a decade later, this guy was doing the best work of his career, a part of the corporation, the whole McMahon storyline, and everything during the Attitude Era. It's amazing to think that I didn't even know that he was a part of the WWF for that long, and he was this Big Boss Man character, a babyface, and he was just kind of this patrol officer and stuff like that. But it wasn't until years after this that WWE realized that he had history in reality as a correctional officer, and they would incorporate that into the gimmick. He would get over. He had the awesome theme song, very good in the ring for what it was. Faced the Undertaker at WrestleMania in a Hell in a Cell match. That says it all right there. And unfortunately passed away in, I think, early 2000s or late 90s. I think the early 2000s. But anyway, though, this matchup was pretty basic for what it was. I mean, Big Boss Man went over, and Koko Ware, I mean, as over as he was, into the whole fun gimmick. I mean, the 80s version of R-Truth, if you want to go there. It was a pretty forgettable matchup. But like I said before, the biggest highlight of this contest was seeing Big Boss Man in the 80s. I mean, in 1988, fast forward in the late 90s to 1999, the guy's competing for the WWF Championship. Granted, he would never win it, but like I said before, would face the Undertaker at WrestleMania, be a big factor, play a big role in the whole corporation's storyline in the late 90s, the War Games tournament at Survivor Series, all that kind of stuff, everything that Big Boss Man accomplished, really all kind of started here with this gimmick that went nowhere, and turning him a heel and having him play that correctional officer that he was in real life was the best thing to ever happen to him. So, like I said, forgettable matchup here, but the highlight of this contest was easily seeing Big Boss Man before he became the Big Boss Man. And up next we had, what the hell did I write down here? Jake Roberts taking on Hercules. Pretty regular matchup, I guess, even though that Jake Roberts and Rick Rude were feuding at the time. They didn't want to have them clash on the show. So they put them in two separate singles matches against two people they didn't really have much history with. Jake Roberts taking on Hercules. Haven't seen much of Hercules' work. I know I've heard of him before multiple times. But the matchup, for what it was, Hercules dominated most of it. He was the aggressor for most of the matchup, only for Jake Roberts to hit the DDT out of nowhere and get the pinfall victory and win. I figured either Rick Rude would interrupt, much like Jake Roberts interrupted his matchup and caused the DQ loss for for Hercules, or he would attack him after the matchup, cut a promo or something. Nothing of that really ever happened. Jake Roberts went over and that was it. But Jake Roberts, based on his reaction when he came out here, when he won, when he came out earlier on in the night to attack Rick Rude, this guy was definitely over, obviously. I mean, that goes without saying. But as a babyface, as great of a heel as he was, the guy was tremendously over as a babyface. And the fact that also he, with some other guys that I mentioned earlier on in the video, that he never won a world championship in WWE is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. He was right up there with Macho Man and Hogan as one of the most over guys on the show as a babyface. So, like I said before, the fact they didn't do more with him in terms of giving him a world title push is absolutely beyond me. But for what that was, a good way to further the momentum of Jake Roberts, but didn't do much to further the feud with him and Rick Rude, even though they tried to further earlier on in the night, which I thought was good. But they didn't do much after that, which was surprising to me. But Jake Roberts goes over there. Before we get to the main event, we also had a segment on the show. We had the Brother Love show. I forgot what the exact name of it was called, but of course, Bruce Pritchard. It's Bruce Pritchard from the WWE as Brother Love. Had that segment with Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was also one of the most over guys in the show, too. And this was only months removed from when he won the inaugural Royal Rumble matchup. Won the inaugural Royal Rumble matchup at the Royal Rumble in 1988. So he was obviously a big star at the time. He also would never win any gold in the WWE, but he would also be one of the most iconic figures of the 1980s, and being extremely over as he was selling merch, the 2x4, the t-shirts, everything. The segment with Brother Love was really nothing great. I mean, they had a nice back and forth verbal exchange, and the fans desperately wanted to see Hacksaw get his hands on Brother Love, but Brother Love would run away before that became possible. And it was probably just a way to kill some time. The show on the whole was 2.5 hours, and they probably just wanted to use this as filler to serve as a buffer between two matches. I can't remember what matchup it followed and what matchup it happened before. I can't remember where this was placed in the show, but I just wanted to throw that out there before it got to the main event. So main event time, the Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks, the biggest storyline going into this show. Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage taking on Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant. So, very good storytelling from WrestleMania. Like I said before, I believe this was the first pay-per-view since WrestleMania 4. Hulk Hogan and Andre, obviously a lot of history there, dating back even before WrestleMania 3 and going well into this matchup here, had faced off in the WWF Championship tournament at WrestleMania 4. Their match going to a draw, and it was in the finals that Macho Man would defeat Ted DiBiase to become the new WWF champion. So, that being said, a lot of history here between the two competitors, between all four competitors, and that's what made it that much more of an anticipated encounter. And I like the fact they recapped what happened going into this pay-per-view. They showed some recaps of some old Superstars episodes featuring DiBiase challenging Macho Man, and Macho Man putting out the challenge and DiBiase accepting, and appointing Jesse Ventura as the special guest referee, which was cool. I mean, with him being the heel commentator, the whole storyline was that DiBiase paid him off, and that he would be favoring the heels, and that the odds were in the heels' corner, especially since Bobby the Brain Heenan was also a manager, as well as Virgil for the heels at the time. So the odds were definitely stacked against the babyfaces in this contest, so they had to try to overcome the odds and emerge victorious. So that was the whole storyline going into this matchup. So I like the fact they kind of built that up. They showed the recaps going into this matchup to kind of refamiliarize fans, and especially for someone like me that had no idea what happened going into this contest, or going into this event as a whole. And they would also show Macho Man naming his mystery partner to be Hulk Hogan, forming the Mega Powers, Mega Bucks, and there you go. So the matchup itself was pretty solid. I thought it would go on a little longer than it should have. But for what it was, though, was a lot of solid storytelling, a lot of solid action. The babyfaces, surprisingly enough, got more of the aggressive offense than the heels did. They were more of control of the contest for more of it than the heels were, so that was really surprising. But good work by everyone all around. I mean, by this point, Andre was really at the end of his stick. He was at WrestleMania 3 when he faced Hogan, but it would only be a few more years after that he would retire and eventually die only 5 years later, actually, after this. But even so, though, some really good action here. The fans were into everything they did, even though the action wasn't really all that entertaining. I mean, the babyfaces and their comebacks were entertaining for me as a viewer, and the fans in attendance were that much more excited about it than I was. But great stuff there. And like I said before, because Andre was kind of at the end of his stick at this point in time, DiBiase did most of the in-ring work, which is probably for the better. And Macho Man would hit the flying elbow, the top rope elbow, on a DiBiase. Hogan would follow up with a big boot to pick up the victory for the team. And I guess, and this kind of bothered me, and I know they would turn this into a storyline months later going to WrestleMania 5 with Hogan and Savage, but Hogan pretty much completely overshadowed Randy Savage for most of this. I know they would come out Randy Savage came out first, and then Hogan would come out for the entrances, but it really felt like that they were spotlighting Hogan a lot more than they were Randy Savage, despite the fact that Randy Savage was the WWF champion. So I thought they would do more to put the spotlight on Randy Savage. The least they could have done was to have him pick up the pinfall victory and celebrate to his music afterwards, given the fact that he was the champion and not Hogan. So Hogan kind of overshadowed Savage in that respect, and they would obviously, like I said before, they would turn that into a storyline with Elizabeth being the central focus of it, and they actually planted the seeds for that match after this contest when Hulk Hogan, after they picked up the victory, would go over to Elizabeth, hug her, pick her up in the air, and Savage would shoot him a glance like, "What the hell are you doing, bro? Why are you taking my lady?" And that was a great way of building towards their eventual WrestleMania match of him planting the seeds for Savage's heel turn months down the line. And Elizabeth's distraction of the heels at the end of this contest when she would pull off her dress and distract the heels in the ring, I guess is regarded as one of the best SummerSlam moments of all time. I could definitely see it as being memorable. I don't know about the greatest, but it got a great reaction from the crowds. Elizabeth and Savage were such a great pairing, one of the best couples in WWE history, in my opinion. And the fact that got only 10 on that countdown special on the network is absolutely beyond me. But then again, it is voted on by fans, so I'm not all that surprised. But even so, though, a great way to go off the show. Crowd is very happy to see the faces go over. And like I said before, not only was it a good matchup, but it furthered the feud, or furthered the storyline, planted the seeds for Randy Savage eventually turning on Hulk Hogan and splitting with Elizabeth. So great stuff all around, top to bottom. I thought this was a solid show. You can't really say, oh, this show was terrible because it didn't have enough in-ring action. It's fucking 1988, people. This isn't 2014 where we have Daniel Bryan and CM Punk and all the technical masterpieces. Shawn Michaels wasn't on the show. For what it was, we got a lot of good matches on the show. No blockbusters, but if there's anything I would suggest that you go out of your way to watch, in terms of moments, Ultimate Warrior winning the Intercontinental Championship, if there was one moment you should go out of your way to watch from the show, it would be that. Warrior winning the Intercontinental title, kind of establishing that title as his own, and kind of kicking off the Warrior era in WWE in terms of popularity and winning championships, all that kind of stuff. The main event was also pretty good too. That was what this entire show was built around. It was really a one-match show, with that being the central focus of this entire SummerSlam and everything else kind of filling out the card. But that was a good matchup, and the ending was good as well. What else? The furthering of the feud between Jake Roberts and Rick Rude I thought was good. The matches they partook in weren't really phenomenal, but for what they were, I enjoyed them. So with that being said, though, I thought this was a good pay-per-view all around. If you want to make sure to check it out on the WWE Network for more information. But with that being said, thanks for watching, folks. Always appreciate the support. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be back next week with another review of a SummerSlam. What year it will be, I have no idea. But in the meantime and in between time, make sure to check out past videos and my reviews of other pay-per-views on the WWE Network. I'll be back next week, and this is Graham Jason Matthews. We'll see you then.